Welcome back, 6th grade. Today we're going to continue looking at other ways that we can organize and use data. This method is called a dot plot. Now, a dot plot is a lot like a line plot, except that instead of using X's, we're going to use dots, okay? But it's a visual representation of data, and it's done in order from least to greatest. So let's look at page 472 in your book. Okay, it says statistical questions are answered by collecting and analyzing data. One way to understand a set of data is to make a visual display. And a dot plot is a type of visual display in which each piece of data is represented by a dot above a number line. And each dot shows the frequency of that data value. So every time you see a dot, it means that number. Okay? So let's look at the example. We have a baseball team manager who records the number of runs scored by the team in each game for several weeks. And we're going to use this data to make a data plot. So here's the data. 131720, so on. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is make a number line. And in this case, we're going to look and see that, well, we need to have a least value of 0 and a greatest value of 11. So that will determine what numbers we put on our number line. But this one's already done for us. Okay? So the way you would do this is every time you use a dot or a value, like we start with number 1, I'd cross it off and I would draw the dot above the number 1. Now here only the even numbers are shown, but there's a space for the odd numbers in between. Okay, that's just to make it less junky looking. Okay, so you would go through and do this for each one. Cross off a 3, put a dot. Now you always start at the bottom, right above the number, and as you use that data value more than once, the dots get kind of stacked on top of each other. So you build up with that. So let's look at what this means. Well, how many times did they score 0? Well, there's only one dot there. So there was one game with 0 runs. This is 1 run. How many games had 1 run? Well, each dot represents a game, so it would be 3 dots. 3 games where 1 run was scored. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There were 6 games where 2 runs were scored. There were 3 games where 3 runs were scored, and so on. Okay, so the question is, how many games did the team play during the season? Well, each dot is a game, right? And we just place them on this number line depending on how many runs were scored in that game. So you could add up all of the dots. If you did, there are 19 of them. So there were 19 games in that season. Each dot represents a game. So the next question is, how many games does a team score 2 runs or fewer? Well, we could just put a box around all the games that are 2 or fewer and count them up. So we already said there were 6 here, 3 here, so 10 games. And again, how do you know? So what did we do? We counted the dots over 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so let's try the one below. And now we have a different baseball team that scores the following number of runs in its games for several weeks. Use the data to make a dot plot. So we have a number line, but it's blank, so we have to decide how to number it. So if we look closely at our data, we have 4, 4, 6, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 5, 3, 3, 5, 4, 2. So it looks like the least value is 1, and the greatest value is 6. So I think we could probably do every other. 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 6. We can kind of spread it out a little bit. Okay, so now we're going to go through, and every time you see that data value, we're going to draw a dot. And I like to cross them off after I draw them so that I don't lose track of what I've done. Go ahead and pause the video and finish that. So your dot plot should look something like this. And the question now is, tell how many games the team played. Well, we can add up the dots, right? Because each dot is a game, and there are 14 games. And identify the data value with the greatest frequency. That means what occurred most frequently. Well, the most dots happened here at 4. So there were, and because there are 4 dots, there were 4 games with 4 runs. All right, we're going to jump to page 475, and we're going to use the information that we just put in that dot plot about the baseball team scores to answer this question, okay? So I'm actually going to have it handy so that will help us with what we need to answer. So let me see if I can do this. What we want to do now is use the data that we just put in the dot plot, and we want to find the mean, median, and range of this set of data. Okay? Mean, median, and range. So if you remember, the mean is the average. So if you have your calculator handy, we can start working on this calculation. Now we know that there are 14 games. That means there's 14 pieces of data that we're using. So what we have to do is add up all the data and then divide it by 14. Now let's say we didn't have this list of data. All we had was the data, the dot plot. We can still do the calculation based on the visual representation of the data. So in your calculators, we're going to add up the runs scored. Okay? So if we start at the bottom of this chart, we have a 1, but we have it 2 times. So we would put 1 in twice. Okay? And then we have 2 3 times. So we would add 3 2s to that. Okay? Then we would go to 3, and we had 3 runs twice, so we want to add that twice. Now you notice I haven't hit the equal sign yet because we're still adding. And then 4 happened 4 times. Now do you think I could just put 16 in? Yeah, because adding 4 times is the same as adding 16. And again, I'm still adding. I haven't put an equal sign in here yet. And then we have 2 5s, which would be 10. And then we have a 6 that we can add. And we have a total of 46. Okay, but we need to now divide that by the number of data values. And there were 14 games. Each dot is a data value, right? So we're going to divide that by 14. And our result, we would say, is about 3 3/10. So the mean is approximately 3 3/10. Okay, the median will be the middle value, right? So how do we find the middle value from a dot plot? Well, we work our way in, right? Just like we would if they were listed from least to greatest. They are kind of listed from least to greatest, but remember we have to account for every dot. So if I start on the 6 and the 1, I got to remember there's 2 1s. So I'm going to go to the second one and into the 5. And then I'm going to go to 2 and to the other 5. And then I'm going to go to a second 2 and then to the first 4. and then the third 2 and the second 4, and then the first 3 and the third 4, and then we have a 3 and a 4 left. And because there's even number, there's going to be 2 in the middle, right? We have a 3 and a 4 in the middle, so halfway between 3 and 4 would be 3 and 5/10. And if it makes more sense for you to lay them out least to greatest, you should absolutely do that. And then we also need to find the range. And if you remember, the range is the distance from the least to the greatest. Well, the least you can see is 1 and the greatest is 6. So the difference between them is 5. So now, what is the typical number of runs that a team scores in a game? That's really what we're trying to find out. Well, the mean is greater than 3, the median is greater than 3, halfway between 3 and 4. It's probably between 3 and 4 would be a reasonable number to use for the typical number of runs. Between 3 and 4. So I'd like you to try on that same page 475 numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then you can come back tomorrow and see how you did.